Okay, so next up we have something very different. We have Nicky Agius, who was actually a PhD student just 2.5 years ago. So if you wanted an example of very, exactly the same kind of contemporary issues that everybody has to deal with right now, I think she's a perfect candidate to talk about this. Nicky is now working in the Home Office, but is in the operational research far stream and started a career in the Department of Work and Pensions after obviously working in astronomy before that. So I'm looking forward to hear what she's doing in this role as well, and that's a brilliant title too. So over to you. Thanks, Nicky.
Thanks, Robert. Hi, everyone. Yes, so as mentioned, my name is Nicky, and just 2.5 years ago, I finished my PhD at the University of Central Lancashire, where I was studying specifically galaxies, and in fact using the Herschel Atlas mechanism. So I was using data from Herschel to tell me about galaxies and the way they evolved. I'll talk more about that in a moment. I just thought I would start by taking you through some of my past experiences, how I got to the place that I ended up now. And I guess that's why I've put a timeline up there, because I find timelines to be incredibly useful things. Basically, I moved to the UK. I'm not actually British. I'm from Malta, which is a beautiful island. I recommend it for a visit. I moved to the UK a few years ago now to do my A-levels. And while I was doing those A-levels, I discovered astronomy. I already loved physics, but I had a teacher who convinced me to do a GCSE in astronomy, and I instantly fell in love with it. And you can ask any member of my family who, for all those years, heard me go on and on and on about how astronomy was the most brilliant thing, and all I wanted to do was become an astronomer for the rest of my life. And I duly did that. I went on to St Andrews University to read an MPhil in physics with astrophysics. My dissertation, I worked with Simon Driver in the Gamma team, so that's a big multinational team who were using basically data from a host of different wavelengths from across the world, from multiple instruments, to learn more about specifically galaxy evolution, as well as some other things. And I loved it so much that following on from my MPhil, I moved to the University of Central Lancashire in Preston to do a PhD, again working with Gamma, but also with the Herschel Atlas team, so working in conjunction with them, which was really great for my partnering and collaborating skills, to look at how we could use sub-millimeter data to understand more about very old galaxies and how they evolved through time. And that was, frankly, one of the most interesting things I ever did in my life. I absolutely loved my PhD. Luckily finished in quite a timely manner, handed in January 2014. And it was at that point where, probably in the 3 months while I was writing up my thesis, where I sat down and I said, what do I actually want to do at this next stage in my life? It was quite a, I've got my PhD, I'm a real astrophysicist now, but what do I want to do next? Because you would think I would just want to go on and do a postdoc and be more astrophysics-y by the day, but I was at a point in my life where I thought, well, is astrophysics, or actually is academia, really for me? So I made a bit of a pro and con list, because that's what I like to do. Starting with the pros, obviously, as I've mentioned a couple of times now, I really, really love astronomy, astrophysics, all that sort of stuff. Anything in space with physics, love it. I also really like project management. During my PhD, I had a lot of opportunity to drive the way my projects worked. I worked in collaboration with people from around the world, leading several teams because it was my data, I sort of had ownership of it. And I realized that I really enjoyed sort of leading a project to conclusion and to completion. I love social and additional responsibilities. I believe Bruce maybe and potentially John earlier mentioned that it's not just about sitting there and doing a PhD and being great at programming, but it's all the additional stuff that you do. So while I was at UCLan, I led the seminar program, making loads of contacts. I organized a few pub trips, not too many, I promise. I'm pretty sure I did some other things, but I can't even remember what they were right now. Engagement with other analysts, not just necessarily from astrophysics. Again, that whole collaboration aspect was brilliant, going to conferences, loved all that. And that last point, conference and travel opportunities, I mean, got to go to Australia, what more could a girl want? And then I thought about the cons, which is sort of the harder bit. I really don't like looking around for funding, and I don't really like looking around for new jobs. My experience of talking to sort of higher level people with tenure, professors, was that actually they spent a lot of their time applying for funding for new projects so they could then hand off to their students to do all the fun programming stuff and analysis. And I thought, well, I actually really like the analysis part rather than the writing applications for funding. And also the whole job having to apply for new jobs and having to move around thing was quite concerning for me because my boyfriend had just moved to London, had a new job. I was like, I want to live in London, I want to buy a house, that'd be delightful. So moving around wasn't really an option. I wanted a job that would keep me sort of set. And I do find that ultimately academia is highly competitive, and while I have a lot of regard for myself and my abilities, you know, there's probably always someone who's a bit better out there. So I was a bit like, is this really the route that I want to go down? And ultimately, I decided it probably wasn't. So I had a bit of a scooch around on the internet and looked at what other options were available for me. One thing I really thought about was just doing outreach. But I thought, no, I can do better than this. Can I take the skills that I have and apply them in a non-academic sort of situation? So I found out about something called operational research, and I heard about it. Someone mentioned it to me, probably on the street, I don't know. And so I went home and I Googled it. I didn't have a smartphone back then because even though we use our smartphones, actually 2.5 years ago, I only had BlackBerry and it was really rubbish for the internet. So I went home and I Googled it. And Google tells you that it's the use of advanced analytical techniques to improve decision-making. It is sometimes known as operations research, management science, or industrial engineering. And I thought, oh my God, yawn. But don't let that name or definition put you off. Because if you go to the government operational research website, this here is their description. And I'm not going, you should be able to read that, it's not too small. I'm not going to read it out. But there's some things in this description that really rung true with me. So I've just underlined a few things there. There were certain phrases, complex systems, intellectual rigor, solving the problem. And I thought, well, I could do all that, that's cool. I've been doing that for years, doing my PhD. There were some other things. So complex management problems, decision-making process. Those were a bit unfamiliar to me, but I thought I could do this too. And basically my understanding of what operational research as a topic is basically using analytical skills and problem-solving skills that I basically already had to help people make important decisions. So I applied for the operational research fast stream. Now what is this? The government loves operational research. They love having evidence to base their decisions on. And, you know, government makes a lot of big decisions every single day. So they really like having that sort of analytical effort to put some rigor into those decisions. So the fast stream is actually a graduate scheme, if you will, for people who have those broad analytical skills, want to go into operational research, don't necessarily have a degree in operational research, like me, and also have those softer skills, leadership abilities, collaboration, communication abilities, or project management. It's for those people who want to advance up the civil service quite quickly. And I thought this is really for me because, hey, I'm not young anymore. I mean, I'm not that young anymore. I actually want to get quite high up in my respective career quite quickly. So let's go for this. And so this little timeline, again, I love a timeline. That's me, by the way. So this timeline basically shows my whole application for the fast stream operational research for the civil service. So what did I do? You put in an application, as you always do, and I did this around about the time that I handed in my thesis. You have to do some tests on verbal and numerical skills, and you know, numerical skills were all fine, verbal we just about get through, at least I do. Government gives you loads of support in applying for the fast stream, so we had an away day where we got to meet other operational researchers who had been successful on this scheme, learned a bit more about it, gave us that additional information to say, hey, is it worth going through all this to go work for the government? I decided it was. You have a couple of assessment centres which are quite widely spread out. So the first one tests your analytical skills. It gives you sort of problem structuring exercises, things like that. And the second one tests your softer skills. So we had all sorts of crazy stuff, pretending to be a manager, pretending to be in a team meeting, things like that, where they sort of test you to see whether you have those additional skills. And, I got that letter about 4 months after applying for the FAST stream, saying I was successful and that I'd received a place at the Department for Work and Pensions. And then I had some security checks, and 6 months after finishing, less than 6 months after my Viva, in fact, I started my new job at Work and Pensions. And I've just put these little things in there, which just show that in between doing all that stuff, which might look a bit hectic, I, had my Viva, I did my minor corrections, then I went off to Vietnam just for a bit of fun. Okay, sorry, my life at Department of Work and Pensions. I was there for about a year and a half, from August 2014 until January 2016. This just gives you a bit of a sense of how I developed while I was working there. So I was working on Universal Credit, which is a new benefit system that has been designed to sort of take over the older benefit systems, and gives people benefits in a sort of cleverer way using the working information. So it's a benefit that's designed to get people into work. What did I do? So as you can imagine, there are hundreds of job centres all around the UK whose daily job is to go out, well, not to go out, for people to come in and join whatever benefit that they need to join, and then there's all this sort of background work that needs doing, and basically, with a whole new benefit being rolled out, they needed some analysts to come in and say, well, how are we going to do this in a sensible way that's not going to clog up the works, that's going to be basically very sensible. So I did lots of really cool stuff while I was at DWP, because I was constantly engaging with operational stakeholders, so managers from service centres and job centres around the UK. I got to think about the way we actually deliver benefits, from the person walking into the job centre to what goes on behind the scenes, all the people making the phone calls, sending out letters, things like that, and to people actually receiving their benefits, which of course is the most important part. We thought about things like fraud and error as well, which is really cool. What did I do while thinking about these things? I worked on a forecasting model, for one thing. I had a bunch of data that's collected by the people who work for us at DWP. This data basically saying for every benefit claimant that walks into a job centre, we do all these things. So we spend this amount of time answering phone calls, we spend this amount of time doing X, Y, and Z, whatever. And basically, my stakeholders turned around to me and they were like, we really don't know how many people we have to employ, how long they have to work for every day, et cetera, to clear the workload so that people can actually receive their benefit on time. So as you can imagine, this was quite important. So I just used a very simple regression model to build a set of forecasts, which basically look like that. What was really good fun is that civil servants weren't quite used to using forecasts. They had only really seen points-based forecasts before, which, as you can imagine, are a bit rubbish. No one's ever going to get their forecasting exactly right. So I introduced uncertainty into forecasting. So sort of that blue little shaded thing is the uncertainty around my point forecast. I got to do quite a bit of research into that sort of thing. So I obviously had never done any forecasting before in my life. So I got to spend loads of time talking to people, reading research papers, figuring out how to do this, using all of my sort of programming skills, SQL mainly. Here, also loads of data matching. That was actually quite fun. And sort of the outcome, and this is one of the really good things about working in government, is that you actually see the outcome of your project work, is that my stakeholders came back to me and they said, oh, this is great. We actually know how we can then break down sort of all these tasks into a number of full-time employees and make sure that we can actually deliver people's benefits on time. So that was one thing I was really proud of. And then I got a really cool task while I was there, where basically stakeholders came to me and they said, well, we have people coming in to claim benefits, but we actually don't really know anything about them, and we don't really understand our data. Could you just tell us something about the people who are claiming benefits? And I was just like, well, you didn't tell me exactly what you want. So I talked to a few more people, and I basically decided that what they want to understand is whether people coming on this new benefit change, whether their behaviors changed with time, whether the people coming in were more likely to go off and get a job, whether there were a certain batch or segment of people who were more likely to, after coming onto this benefit, claim housing benefits, things like that. So I came up with this little tool, which actually I had designed during my PhD, so that was really, really useful, which basically just lays out where our cohort of claimants sits in terms of whether they have a job or whether they don't have a job, whether they're getting a benefit, whether they have housing benefits, things like that. And that allowed us to discern, by plotting this across time, how people were moving across our system. So again, that was really useful. They ended up calling it the claimant journey, and apparently they're still being used at DWP, so I feel like I've left my legacy over there. But anyway, so I felt like I made my mark at DWP, and then I thought, well, I'm on the operational research fast stream, and one of the points of being on the fast stream is that I need to get promoted within about 4 years, and that's quite difficult to do. So it's time that I move department, get a completely new set of skills that I don't already have. And I was feeling pretty confident about my data matching skills by this point, because I'd done tons of it. So in January, I moved over to the Home Office to work in a completely different job. So I now sit in the Partnerships, Analysis and Communication team in the Voluntary Return Service, and I also sit across our analytical division, which is Decision Support for Operations. So I'm an embedded analyst who basically sits with a bunch of people who know absolutely nothing about research and analysis. Their jobs are to go out and communicate with migrants, basically. So I work in immigration enforcement, and basically our ultimate aim is to get people to return home voluntarily once they are here illegally. So I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. But basically, since I've been at the Home Office, so since January, we're now in October, it's been about 9 months, I basically lead an entire research framework for my work. I developed this research framework based on the needs of my stakeholders. Building on that, I lead 2 large projects. I pull in data from a range of different sources. I project manage another analyst. So loads and loads of really fun stuff, which helps to inform decisions which are being made on a daily basis. So the sort of decisions I help to inform are, where are we targeting our communications? Who are we targeting our communications to? Are they having any sort of impact? What about our daily operations? What about the operations we come up with? So I continue to sort of use customer journeys to identify where we should be directing our communications and operations. Since I've been there, I've really worked on what we call soft OR skills. So a soft OR skill, for example, is the ability to engage with stakeholders and understand what they want. It's also things like running workshops. So I actually quite frequently run workshops. I bring in stakeholders, again, from across the business, also from outside the business, and I basically try to get them to put all the different issues aside and tell me exactly what they need and how they can use it, so I can go off and provide the analysis for it. My general skills are always improving, I hope. I get to use a range of different programming languages, which I know are completely different to maybe the sort of things you use during your PhD. But hey, this is government, we have security issues to worry about. So no, we're not using Python. What else? Project management, that is potentially one of the things that I started to develop during my PhD, but moving into the government sector, and particularly moving roles twice, has really helped me to build that up. So couldn't say any more about that, really. In terms of the hard OR skills, so hard OR skills are really those sort of analytical skills that you potentially did learn during your PhD, and now you need to apply to something that's not, in my case, astrophysics. So I already mentioned forecasting. I've done a bit more time series analysis. Clustering and segmentation is something that I do, looking at how customers sort of fit into different clusters based on their behaviors. So lots of really cool, fun stuff. I still get to do all that analytical stuff, but I also get to go off and talk about the hard analytical stuff to people who know nothing about analysis, and that really is the biggest challenge. So this is the team that I currently work in. Now, I can't really talk very much about the analysis I do at the moment, but this is a clip from a Mail article that came out 2 weeks ago, and it presents a very interesting light on what the Home Office does around immigration enforcement and illegal migrants. So I'm not going to say any more about that, except that it was really quite funny to read, and a couple of other clips that were on the same webpage with these, so, you know, take it with a pinch of salt. If you do want to read a bit more about our work, just Google voluntary returns, and the gov.uk website really does fill it all in for you in probably a better way than Celebrity Mums does. Oh, and the last thing about my role. It's not just about going into the office every day and doing the same thing day in, day out. In fact, it's never the same thing day in, day out. Besides analysis, I get to do a lot of that fun stuff that I really enjoy doing my PhD. In the last 2 years, at DWP, I created an entire group designed to basically teach people about leadership. So there are something like, I think, 80 fast streamers at DWP, and I basically started this program that encouraged their leadership forming abilities because we felt that that was sort of missing. So that was one really fun thing I did. The Aqua book. Analytical quality assurance is a big thing for us, as it is for anyone doing a PhD, anything to do with numbers. So the Aqua book is a government book which was written to basically talk about the theoretical principles of understanding uncertainty, quality assurance, things like that. So I'm currently leading a group that's designing workshops and practical examples of how to apply that to the everyday. The GORS conference, 3 months after starting at DWP, I organised a whole conference together with other fast streamers. That was quite a challenge. Met a lot of really great collaborators and analysts there. And a month ago, I threw a cross-government party, which had about 100 attendees, all analysts, and it was really good fun. And these are all things that you just decide to do, get permission if you need to, and you get to take a little bit of time out of your day to do these things that help to develop you as a person, your softer skills particularly, and it's a really great way to make friends. So, this is my plug now, and I'll rush through this because, yep, I'm taking my time. Is operational research for you? Now, I've just worked in 2 areas of government, and there are so many more things that we are useful at. Operational researchers across government work on climate change. They look at the economic downturns at HMRC. There's loads of ORs there. Department for Education, they look at improving schools, the whole free school thing. Look at drug smuggling, knife crime. NHS waiting times is a big thing that I'm claiming no responsibility for. And child poverty. All really big issues that we get to lend a hand in providing evidence for every single day. So, as you can imagine, the sort of not happiness, that's the wrong word, but we feel like there's real value in the work that we do. We're not just based in London, there's a lot of departments in London, but actually there are departments who employ operational researchers all around the UK. I won't talk any more about that. In terms of training professional development, that's a massive thing. You don't just come in and they expect you to know how to do the job. You're constantly training. I just spent the last 2 days doing an advanced SQL course, and I feel like it was really useful. We go to seminars, we do things like this, attend conferences, we have opportunities for secondment, shadowing of senior ministers in some cases, departmental transfer opportunities, as I did. Volunteering is a big thing. We're able to go off and spend up to 5 days a year volunteering, doing pro bono work, and we also have mentoring schemes. I'm currently mentored by a senior civil servant, which is really great and useful. I won't really talk about salary and benefits, except that there is a salary and there are great benefits. And if you are interested in applying for GORS, which I highly recommend you do if you do want to leave academia and you don't want to work for a bank, Fast Stream, on the 29th of September, applications opened for that, and they close on the 30th of November, so you still have time to apply for that. That will basically require you to fill out an application form, and then you'll have the Fast Stream Assessment Centre and the Operational Research Assessment Centre, as I had. If you are not as interested in doing operational researcher so that you can get promoted, if you want to just sort of come in and do all the nitty-gritty, hardcore analytical work, you have no interest in, I don't know, being a leader or a manager, you can come in through the mainstream. The requirements to enter that are slightly lower in the sense they don't test you on your softer skills, they only test you on your analytical skills. And we're constantly recruiting, so just if you go on the Civil Service Jobs website, just set up an alert if you're interested in that. We also recruit students on year-long placements. I don't think that's relevant for any of you, but if it is, just come talk to me later. And we are also, last plug, holding an evening event in January. So the government's holding an evening event in January for PhD students, I believe, which will include talks from a range of speakers. It's quite similar to this one. I think you can ask Vishanti if you are interested in hearing more about that. And that is me. Thank you.